The sound of gunfire shattered the evening calm as Lillian O'Connor crouched behind a barrel, clutching her shawl tightly around her trembling shoulders. Dust swirled around her skirts, the Montana Territory of 1876 proving as unforgiving as the man pursuing her own father's business partner, who intended to claim her as payment for debts she hadn't even known existed. "You can't hide forever, Lillian." Vernon Blackwell's voice boomed across the main street of Silver Creek. His heavy footsteps crunched on the dirt road as he approached the general store where she'd sought refuge. "Your father signed the papers. You're mine now, whether you like it or not." Lillian's breath caught in her throat. At 21, she'd expected to marry someday, but never like this, never forced into a union with a man 30 years her senior. A man with cold, calculating eyes and a reputation for cruelty toward his previous wives, both of whom had died under mysterious circumstances. "There ain't no place left to run," Vernon called out, his voice closer now. "I've got the law on my side. Your pa's debts are mine to collect, and you're the payment." Tears stung Lillian's eyes. Her father had gambled away everything, including her future, before typhoid took him just 3 days prior. The ink had barely dried on his will when Vernon had produced the marriage contract, claiming immediate ownership of both the struggling O'Connor ranch and Lillian herself. "I believe the lady doesn't share your enthusiasm for this arrangement." The new voice, deep and steady, caused Lillian to peek around the edge of the barrel. A tall man stood in the middle of the street, facing Vernon. Even in the fading light, she could make out his broad shoulders beneath a dust-covered duster coat, the glint of a silver star pinned to his vest, and the confident way he rested his hand near his holster. "This ain't your business, deputy," Vernon spat. "I've got legal papers." "Legal papers for a business transaction, perhaps," the deputy replied calmly, "but I don't recall marriage being something you can force on an unwilling woman, not in this town." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "She's mine. Her father owed me. Her father might have owed you, but she doesn't." The deputy took a step forward. "Now, why don't you head on back to the saloon and cool off? Miss O'Connor is coming with me to the sheriff's office where we can sort this out properly." For a terrifying moment, Lillian thought Vernon might draw his gun. His hand twitched near his holster, but something in the deputy's stance must have given him pause. "This ain't over," Vernon growled before turning and stalking away. Only when he had disappeared into the saloon did Lillian emerge from her hiding place. The deputy approached her slowly, as one might a spooked horse. "Deputy Patrick Westfield," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. His face was weathered by the sun, but his blue eyes held kindness she hadn't seen from a man in a long time. "You must be Lillian O'Connor." "Yes," she managed, still trembling. He says I belong to him now." Deputy Westfield's jaw tightened. "No person can own another, Miss O'Connor, no matter what papers they might have. Let's get you somewhere safe for the night, and we'll figure this out come morning." Too exhausted and frightened to argue, Lillian allowed herself to be led to the sheriff's office. Once inside, Deputy Westfield offered her a chair and poured her a cup of water. "Sheriff Collins is out of town until tomorrow," he explained, settling behind the desk. "But I can assure you that you're safe here." "Vernon has influence," Lillian said softly. "My father owed him money, a lot of it. When he died, Vernon came to the ranch with these papers." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled document. "He says my father signed me away to cover his debts." The deputy took the papers, his brow furrowing as he read. "This is a marriage contract, all right, but it's only binding if you consent, which I'm guessing you don't." Lillian shook her head vigorously. "I'd rather die than marry that man." The stories about his previous wives. She couldn't finish the sentence. "I've heard them too," Patrick said grimly. The trouble is, while I can protect you tonight, Vernon does have a legitimate claim on your father's property, including the ranch. Those debts are real." "I don't care about the ranch," Lillian replied, though her heart ached at the thought of losing her childhood home. "I just don't want to be forced to marry him." Patrick studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "There might be a way," he said finally. "But it's not ideal, and you'd have to trust me. I'm not exactly swimming in options, Deputy Westfield." A small smile touched his lips. "Call me Patrick." He leaned forward. "The law says Vernon can't force you to marry him, but he can take your father's property to settle the debt. However, if you were already married to someone else, your husband would have legal authority over your affairs." Lillian stared at him, realization dawning. "Are you suggesting—" "A marriage of convenience," Patrick confirmed. "To me, it would be in name only, of course. Once Vernon's claims are legally challenged and dismissed, we could quietly annul it." Lillian felt dizzy at the thought. "You would do that for a stranger?" "I became a lawman to protect people," Patrick said simply. "And I've seen what happens to women in your situation. Vernon Blackwell is not a man who takes disappointment well." As if to emphasize his point, angry shouting erupted outside, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Patrick rose and peered through the window. "He's riled up the saloon crowd," he observed, "making quite a scene about you being stolen from him." He turned back to Lillian. "I don't mean to rush you, but we need to decide quickly. Sheriff Collins might not see things my way when he returns tomorrow." Lillian took a deep breath. The thought of marrying anyone right now terrified her, but Patrick Westfield had shown her more kindness in the last hour than Vernon had in all the years she'd known him. "All right," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll marry you, Deputy." Patrick nodded solemnly. "We'll need to wake the preacher, and witnesses trustworthy ones." Within the hour, Lillian found herself standing before Reverend Thomas in the small church, with the blacksmith's wife and the town doctor serving as witnesses. She wore the same dusty traveling dress she'd fled in, while Patrick had only had time to wash his face and comb his hair. The ceremony was brief, the words spoken in hushed tones, as if they were conducting a secret mission rather than a wedding. When it came time to exchange rings, Patrick apologetically slipped a simple silver band onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he whispered. "It's all I had." Before she knew it, Reverend Thomas was pronouncing them husband and wife. Patrick hesitated for just a moment before placing a chaste kiss on her cheek, his touch gentle and respectful. As they signed the marriage certificate, Patrick squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's done. You're legally under my protection now." Outside the church, they found Vernon waiting, flanked by two men Lillian recognized as his ranch hands. "Well, well," Vernon drawled, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Playing house with the deputy now, are we?" Patrick stepped in front of Lillian. "Mrs. Westfield and I were just married, Mr. Blackwell. Whatever claims you believe you had on Miss O'Connor are now null and void." Vernon's face darkened. "You think this changes anything? I own the deed to her ranch. She's got nothing now." "The ranch is still part of her father's estate," Patrick replied evenly. "And as her husband, I have the right to contest your claim. We'll see the judge when he comes through next week." Vernon spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Deputy. Not by a long shot." He turned and stumbled away, his men following reluctantly behind. Lillian released a shaky breath. "Where do we go now?" Patrick guided her gently down the church steps. "I have a small house on the edge of town. It's not much, but there's a spare room where you can stay." As they walked through the darkened streets, Lillian suddenly realized what she had done. She had married a man she'd known for mere hours, a man who had sworn to protect her but was ultimately a stranger. Patrick's small home was indeed modest but neat, and well-maintained. A single story with a main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area, and 2 small bedrooms off to the side. "This was my parents' home," Patrick explained as he lit a lamp. "They passed a few years back. I've kept it much the same." He showed her to the smaller bedroom. "You can sleep here. I put fresh sheets on last week, though I wasn't expecting company." "Thank you," Lillian said, feeling awkward in this new space that was now, theoretically, her home. "For everything. I know this is an unusual arrangement. It's temporary," Patrick assured her. "Once the judge rules on Vernon's claim, we can end this marriage quietly." Lillian nodded, though a strange emptiness filled her at his words. Of course this was temporary. That had been the agreement. Yet something about the gentle way Patrick had treated her, the respect in his eyes when he looked at her, made her wonder what it might be like to have a real marriage with such a man. "Get some rest," Patrick said softly. "Tomorrow will be challenging enough." Lillian closed the bedroom door behind her and sank onto the narrow bed. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to truly cry, releasing all the fear and grief she'd been holding inside. When sleep finally claimed her, it was deep and dreamless. Morning brought new challenges. Vernon had posted men outside Patrick's house, watching their movements. Patrick left for his duties at the sheriff's office but insisted Lillian remain inside. "He can't touch you now," Patrick reassured her, "but I wouldn't put it past him to try to intimidate you." Alone in the small house, Lillian busied herself cleaning and cooking, grateful for the distraction. By mid-afternoon, she had prepared a stew using the meager supplies in Patrick's pantry. When he returned for his midday meal, his surprise was evident. "You didn't need to cook," he said, though his appreciation was clear as he savored the meal. "I needed something to do," Lillian admitted, "and it seems the least I can do to thank you." Over the simple meal, they began to learn about each other. Patrick had been born in Silver Creek, the son of a schoolteacher and a carpenter. He'd briefly left to fight in the war, returning to find his mother ill and his father struggling to care for her. After their deaths, he joined the sheriff's office, determined to bring justice to a town increasingly influenced by men like Vernon. Lillian shared stories of her own life growing up on the ranch with her mother, who had died when Lillian was 16, leaving her to care for her increasingly reckless father. She told Patrick of her dreams to someday teach school, dreams that had seemed further and further away as her father's gambling debts mounted. "You still could," Patrick said. "Once this is all settled, you'll be free to pursue whatever life you choose." Their tentative friendship was interrupted that evening by a commotion outside. Patrick opened the door to find Sheriff Collins had returned, and with him, Vernon Blackwell. "Deputy Westfield," the sheriff began, his expression grave. "Mr. Blackwell here tells me you've interfered with a legal contract between him and the late Mr. O'Connor." Patrick stood tall. "I've prevented a forced marriage, Sheriff. Miss O'Connor, Mrs. Westfield, now was being coerced." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Married, are you?" "That was mighty quick work, Deputy." Vernon pushed forward. "It's a sham marriage. They're trying to cheat me out of what's rightfully mine." "The marriage is legal," Patrick replied calmly. "As for Mr. Blackwell's claim on the O'Connor property, that's for the judge to decide when he arrives next week." Sheriff Collins studied both men. "Well, I can't do anything about a legal marriage, no matter how hasty, but I'm putting you on notice, Deputy. If this turns out to be some scheme to interfere with legal contracts, there'll be consequences." After they departed, Lillian collapsed into a chair. "He's not going to give up." "No," Patrick agreed, "he's not, but neither are we." The next few days settled into an uneasy pattern. Lillian remained at the house while Patrick worked his shifts. In the evenings, They shared meals and conversation, gradually learning more about each other. Despite the circumstances, Lillian found herself drawn to Patrick's steady presence and quiet integrity. On the third day, as Patrick prepared to leave for work, Lillian made a decision. "I want to go to the ranch today." Patrick hesitated. "Vernon's men might be watching the property." "I need to collect some of my belongings," Lillian insisted, "and I need to say goodbye, just in case the judge rules in Vernon's favor." Patrick studied her determined expression. "All right, I'll escort you this afternoon when I finish my shift." The O'Connor Ranch was a modest property about 3 miles outside town. As they rode up the familiar dirt road, Lillian felt a lump form in her throat. This had been her home for all 21 years of her life. The main house stood silent, dust already gathering on the porch her father had built with his own hands. Inside, evidence of Vernon's men was everywhere, drawers left open, her father's liquor cabinet emptied, muddy boot prints tracking across her mother's cherished rug. "They've already been through everything," Lillian said softly, running her fingers along the mantelpiece. Patrick's jaw tightened. "I'll note this in my report to the judge. They had no right to enter the property before ownership is settled." Lillian moved through the rooms, gathering clothing, a few books, and the small wooden box containing her mother's jewelry. In her father's study, she found the desk ransacked, papers scattered everywhere. "They were looking for something," Patrick observed, helping her gather the mess. As they sorted through the papers, Lillian found a leather-bound ledger she didn't recognize. Opening it, she gasped. "These are accounts, payments my father made to Vernon." Patrick leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm against her cheek. "These indicate your father paid off his debt to Vernon 3 months ago." Lillian flipped through more pages. "Look at this," a note signed by Vernon acknowledging receipt of final payment. Her hands shook. He knew my father had paid him back, but he still tried to force me to marry him." "This changes everything," Patrick said, carefully taking the ledger. "This is proof that Vernon's claim on the ranch is fraudulent." Their discovery was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Patrick quickly helped Lillian gather her belongings, and they slipped out the back door just as Vernon and 2 of his men rode into the front yard. "Get on your horse," Patrick whispered urgently. "We need to get back to town." They mounted quickly, but not before Vernon spotted them. "Stop them!" he shouted, spurring his horse toward them. Patrick and Lillian galloped away, racing across the open land toward town. Behind them, Vernon and his men gave chase, gaining ground steadily. "They're going to catch us," Lillian cried over the thundering hooves. "Not if I can help it," Patrick called back. He suddenly veered off the main trail, leading them through a dense copse of trees where the larger men would have trouble following. The detour worked. By the time they emerged on the other side, Vernon and his men were far behind. They rode hard for town, not slowing until they reached the sheriff's office. Inside, Patrick presented the ledger to Sheriff Collins. "This proves Vernon's claim is fraudulent. The debt was paid in full 3 months ago." The sheriff examined the documents carefully. "This does appear legitimate. I'll hold on to this for the judge, but in the meantime, I think we need to have a conversation with Mr. Blackwell." When Vernon arrived in town an hour later, he found the sheriff waiting for him. The confrontation was brief but heated, ending with Vernon being warned to stay away from both the ranch and Lillian until the judge arrived. That night, back at Patrick's house, Lillian felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Do you think it's over?" Patrick stoked the fire, his expression somber. "Not yet. Vernon's not the type to admit defeat, but with the evidence we found, the judge will almost certainly rule in your favor." "And then what?" Lillian asked softly. Patrick looked up, meeting her eyes. "Then, as we agreed, you'll be free. The marriage can be annulled." Lillian nodded, though a strange reluctance filled her at the thought. Over the past few days, something had changed between them. What had begun as an arrangement of necessity had grown into something else, a partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. What if? She began hesitantly. What if I don't want an annulment? Patrick's eyes widened slightly. Lillian, you were forced into this union. I never meant to trap you in another unwanted marriage. It wasn't unwanted, she said, finding courage in his gentle gaze. It was unexpected, certainly. But not unwanted, not anymore. Patrick moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. Are you certain? You've been through so much. Your feelings might be confused by gratitude or relief. I know my own mind, Lillian insisted. These past days, living here with you, talking with you, I felt more at home than I ever did at the ranch after my mother died. You've shown me what a true partnership could be. For a moment, Patrick was silent, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. I would be lying if I said I hadn't begun to feel the same, he admitted finally. But I want you to be sure. Once the judge rules and Vernon is no longer a threat, take some time, if you still feel this way. His words were interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. Seconds later, smoke began to fill the room as flames licked up the curtains. Fire! Patrick shouted, pulling Lillian to her feet. Get out! They rushed to the door, but when Patrick yanked it open, two of Vernon's men stood waiting, guns drawn. Evening, deputy, one sneered. Boss wants a word with the lady. Patrick pushed Lillian behind him. Your boss is facing fraud charges. You really want to add kidnapping and arson to the list? The men exchanged uncertain glances, but before they could respond, gunfire erupted from across the street. Sheriff Collins and two townsmen had arrived, driving Vernon's men back. Get to safety. The sheriff called. Patrick and Lillian fled the burning house, running toward the sheriff's office. Behind them, the town's volunteer fire brigade rushed to combat the flames. Inside the sheriff's office, they found Vernon himself already in custody, his face a mask of rage. You've ruined me, he spat at Lillian. That ranch was mine. The ranch was never yours, Sheriff Collins corrected. And now you've added arson and attempted kidnapping to your troubles. The judge will be most interested to hear about this when he arrives tomorrow. Patrick wrapped a protective arm around Lillian's shoulders. You've lost, Vernon. It's over. The next day, Judge Harmon arrived as scheduled. After reviewing the ledger and hearing testimony from both Patrick and Lillian, as well as accounts of Vernon's subsequent actions, he ruled decisively. The debt was paid in full, he declared. The O'Connor Ranch legally belongs to Lillian O'Connor Westfield. Furthermore, Vernon Blackwell is to be held for trial on charges of fraud, arson, and attempted kidnapping. As Vernon was led away in handcuffs, his final threats echoing through the courthouse, Lillian felt a chapter of her life closing. The ranch was hers, free and clear. And now she faced a choice about her future. That evening, she and Patrick stood on the porch of the town's small hotel where they'd been given a room following the fire at his house. The judge asked if we wanted to file for annulment while he's in town, Patrick said quietly. I told him we needed time to discuss it. Lillian gazed out at the sunset, painting the mountains in gold and crimson. Do you want an annulment? Patrick turned to face her fully. What I want is for you to be happy, Lillian, whether that's as my wife or on your own terms. When my father told me I had to marry Vernon, I was terrified, Lillian admitted. Not just of him, but of losing my freedom, of being trapped in a loveless marriage. She took Patrick's hand. But being with you these past days has shown me that marriage doesn't have to mean losing myself. It can mean finding a partner who respects me, who sees me as an equal. Patrick's eyes softened. Is that what you want, a real marriage between us? Yes, Lillian whispered. "If you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Patrick gently cupped her face and lowered his lips to hers. Unlike the chaste peck at their wedding, this kiss held promise and tender passion. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I think that's a yes," Lillian murmured, smiling against his lips. Patrick laughed softly. "A definite yes." In the weeks that followed, they rebuilt their life together. Patrick's house was beyond saving, but with the help of the townspeople, they constructed a new home on the edge of town. Lillian began teaching at the local school, fulfilling her long-held dream. The O'Connor ranch was sold to a young family looking for a fresh start, the proceeds allowing Patrick and Lillian to establish themselves comfortably. Vernon Blackwell was convicted and sentenced to prison, his threats becoming nothing more than a fading memory. On their one-month anniversary, Patrick surprised Lillian with a proper wedding ring to replace his mother's band. "I know we're already married," he said as he slipped it onto her finger, "but I wanted to give you something that represents our choice to be together, not just our necessity." Lillian admired the delicate gold band with its small sapphire stone. "It's beautiful." "There's something else," Patrick said, taking her hands. "I've been offered the position of sheriff in Silver Creek. Sheriff Collins is retiring at the end of the month." "Patrick, that's wonderful." Lillian exclaimed. "You've earned it." "It means more responsibility," he cautioned. "Longer hours sometimes." Lillian squeezed his hands. "And it means this town will have a sheriff who truly cares about justice. I'm proud of you." As summer turned to autumn, their bond deepened. What had begun as a marriage of convenience to escape fear had transformed into a union of genuine love and mutual respect. Each evening as they sat together on their porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Lillian marveled at how her greatest fear had led her to her greatest joy. On a crisp October evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, Lillian placed her hand over Patrick's. "I have something to tell you." Patrick's eyes met hers, warm with affection. "What is it?" "I visited Dr. Morgan today," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "We're going to have a baby in the spring." Patrick's face transformed with joy. He rose from his chair and swept Lillian into his arms, spinning her gently. "A baby, our baby," Lillian laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Our family," she corrected. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Patrick's hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a forced union born of desperation to a marriage filled with hope and love, their story had unfolded in ways she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Patrick murmured sleepily. Lillian turned in his arms, pressing a soft kiss to his chest. "I was thinking that sometimes the things we fear the most lead us to the things we need the most." Patrick tightened his arms around her. "I thank God every day that I was there that night, that I could offer you a way out." "You offered me much more than that," Lillian whispered. "You showed me what love should be." As spring bloomed across the Montana territory, bringing new life to the land, Lillian gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Hope. Standing by the window of their bedroom, Patrick cradled his daughter in his arms while Lillian rested, the scene illuminated by the golden light of dawn. "Welcome to the world, Hope Westfield," he whispered. "You're named for the thing that brought your mother and me together, the hope that even in our darkest moments, something beautiful awaits us." Lillian watched her husband and daughter silhouetted against the sunrise, her heart full to bursting. The marriage that had begun as her greatest fear had become her greatest blessing. In Patrick's steadfast love, she had found not just safety, but partnership, respect, and a joy deeper than she had ever imagined possible. As Hope grew from infant to toddler, the Westfield home became known throughout Silver Creek as a place of warmth and welcome. Sheriff Westfield was respected for his fairness and integrity, while Mrs. Westfield's classroom nurtured the minds of the town's children. On their second anniversary, as they sat together on their porch swing watching Hope play in the yard, Patrick took Lillian's hand. "Are you happy, Mrs. Westfield?" Lillian leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the life they had built together. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." She smiled up at him. "Who would have thought that the most frightening night of my life would lead to all this joy?" Patrick pressed a kiss to her forehead. "From fear to hope," he murmured. "That's our story." "And it's still being written," Lillian replied, placing his hand over her abdomen where their second child had just begun to grow. Patrick's eyes widened with delight. "Truly," her answering smile was radiant. "Truly." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they held each other close, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had transformed a desperate arrangement into a marriage of enduring hope.